Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Heather Frederick, and I'm with the Center for Arkansas Farms and Food. It's a new program in the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. And today I'm joined with County Extension Agents Ryan Neal in Bentonville and Colin Massey in Fayetteville. This summer we partnered with 3 farmers in the area, Dennis McGarrah, Paul Chapraki, and Larry Galligan, to demonstrate tomato production with grafted tomatoes. And we're here today to share the results. We had originally planned twilight tours for this, but because of COVID, we had to pivot, and we're doing this online format now. So we'll be taking you to the sites through videos that were filmed in late July, and we'll be sharing some data that was collected. All 3 farmers are with us today, and so you'll be able to ask them questions. It's important to note that these were not replicated research trials, but we were just testing these varieties out with farmers using their standard production practices. We didn't give them any parameters to follow, such as for fertility, irrigation, or pest management. If you were to try these varieties on your own farm, you would likely get different results. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature rather than a chat box. And we'll hold off answering the questions until after we get through all the sites. We want to make sure that we have enough time to get through all of our information. And if you have a comment though, or if we ask you a question, please use a chat box. For example, it would be great if you could use a chat box to tell us where your name and where you're from. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll post it to the CAF, Center for Arkansas Farms and Food YouTube page. And we'll also put up the videos, the farmer videos that we're going to show today. I'll share the information on where to find the YouTube page at the end of the webinar. Okay, Ryan, do you want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, that would be great. So again, thanks for everybody for joining us. And I also would like to thank all the farmers. Dennis is here with me. It's the beginning of pumpkin season, so it's an extremely busy time. Not that there's any time of the year that's not really busy for him, but I appreciate him here joining us. We're trying to follow the protocol with the mask and everything, and so I apologize for that, and just bear with us. So the idea with this demonstration is, traditionally Dennis grows up to 5 acres of conventionally grown tomatoes, and most of that is for local sales, and so he prides himself on having the best tasting produce that he can grow. And so we know that a lot of the heirloom varieties have the taste that we're looking for at a local level and for local sales. And so we were just wondering if we could improve maybe some of his production practices by growing some of these improved hybrid varieties that are made to taste like the heirloom varieties and look like the heirloom varieties, but have a package that goes along with them that maybe increases productivity or increases the disease tolerance, which maybe would help out the grower. And then for about the last 10 years, there's been grafted tomatoes out there, and they are readily available now that you can either do yourself or purchase the grafted tomato plants. And so this grant that we received was to be able to buy the more expensive seed, buy the more expensive grafts, and really put them side by side with his traditional growing practices of producing his own heirloom tomato transplants. And so just a little bit of a refresher, the 3 heirlooms that Dennis has traditionally grown have been the Brandywine Cherokee Purple, and not always striped German, but we threw that in there just to get that color mix. Here's a little bit of the history that I could find about the plants, but more or less these are open pollinated varieties, so you could save the seed, so there's a benefit certainly to that. But they're also relatively cheap seed. Most of them you can get for 3 cents each or something compared to new hybrid varieties. And they've probably been around for upwards of 100+ years, something like that. And so, a lot of us are familiar with these heirloom type names and looks and tastes. And certainly that's been a mainstay in his production practices, especially for local sales for a long time. But again, we just wanted to compare them with some of the newer ones that are out there. If you want to progress the slide one more. Which we're calling the French heirloom collection. So these were all bred in the Provence region of France. And so again, they are hybrid, so there's an added cost associated with these seeds. And a lot of them will cost upwards of $1 per seed, which can certainly give you sticker shock if you were to buy a 15 seeds for $15. And so we just wanted to see if that could actually be worthwhile in the field, if we can improve crack resistance or productivity or disease management, maybe not have to spray quite as much. And so we just wanted to be able to grant Dennis these seeds so he doesn't have to try them out and risk the loss himself. Here are the 3 varieties that we are calling the French heirloom improved varieties. Marnero, which is made to look like the Cherokee Purple; Marbonne, which looks very similar to the Brandywine; and then Margold, which is looks a lot like the striped German. And they, like I said, come with a pretty substantial disease-resistant package to Fusarium, root rots, verticillium, a lot of things. So, particularly if as a farmer or backyard gardener, even that you suffer from these type of diseases, paying $1 a seed, might very well help you in the long run get production in that raised bed or in that field that you're not easily able to rotate away from. And then just introducing the concept of a graft. I mean, it's something we're very familiar with as far as growing, apple trees or buying apple trees. A lot of times they've come on a grafted rootstock that controls, for certain insect pests, even like aphids, but likely is disease resistant. And also they can really control the size of the plant, especially when you're talking about trees. So a new concept, it's been something that's fairly common for the last 10 years in the United States, but it's been practiced for much longer in Asia, where they'll actually, graft the top parts, in this situation, a good tasting tomato variety onto a very disease resistant, very vigorous tomato rootstock. So if you were just to grow this rootstock out by itself, it's likely not to produce a tomato that would be very edible. And so the idea here is to put the two together. And this is something that farmers can do themselves. But in this case, we just went ahead and let professionals do it and bought the plants. And they are quite expensive. We paid upwards of $4.50 per plant on some of these varieties that were the French heirlooms. So the seed is expensive, the rootstock seed is expensive, and then you put them together with labor and it gets to be a quite expensive plant. And so we also just wanted to put forward that cost, and so Dennis didn't have to make that risk himself as well, and then pin them up against the improved and the heirloom varieties. And then we'll just show a video from Dennis's field here, and then we can talk about the results afterwards.
Okay, can you guys see that video? Well, that wasn't right. Here, let's start at the beginning.
Nothing says summertime is here better than homegrown tomatoes. I have been growing tomatoes since I was 8 years old. I had my first tomato patch, was like 200 plants with my grandma helped me. She was babysitting and we grew them the tomatoes, and that was my first year of earning. My family has been growing tomatoes in this country since probably the earliest 20th century. And we had tomatoes all over this area. Back in the 50s and 60s, this was a tomato growing country, same as apples and everything else. But I have had a tomato field probably, like I said, since I've been 8 years old. Every year I keep saying I ain't going to mess with them because we get disgusted from time to time. But then you have years like this year when you've actually got one of the best looking crops you've had in several years, and it gives you renewed hope in tomatoes, okay? And I sell them at the farmer's market, and my heirlooms are, as far as I'm concerned, the best tasting tomatoes in the world. Of course, I ain't been around the world, but in my world they are, okay? So, and I've been teaching my grandson. My grandson yesterday, he's 9 years old. He picked 168 pints of cherry and chocolate, cherry tomatoes. So he's getting interested. I'm hoping to have somebody to follow me. My son, he's already got him a farm down at Fayetteville established there, and he is going to be farming too. So I've got a next generation. I'm looking for my grandchildren to be the next generation after that. Okay. And like I said, nothing tastes like summer other than an heirloom tomato. And the new culture we've got now, we've been doing plastic for several years, which saves me lots of labor as far as weed pulling and stuff. And also you can concentrate your watering and stuff on that. Also keeps the disease from getting on the plants as bad, because most of your disease are soil bound. I mean, actually come from the soil. Well, of course, in any of the tomato plants, you have a problem with disease, and like any other thing, it's hard to control. Just like this coronavirus here, you know, sometimes things get away from you, and then no matter what you do, you cannot actually fix it. But a lot of the plants, the grafted plants, we're hoping will have a lot of resistance to a lot of the soil-borne diseases we have in this area, and actually be a hardier tomato plant. They will have the same fruit a bit, as I can tell right now. The fruit is just as wonderful as the regular heirlooms. Yeah, the improved version, like I said, we're hoping to find more disease resistance. That means less chemical sprays and stuff to keep the disease down. That is our long-term goal on this project. And to see maybe they even produce more than the regular one. That's our hopes also, you know. More production means more money at the bank, okay? Well, my ideal tomato variety would be heirloom flavor, disease resistant, and the number one, crack resistant. I don't know if that is possible to breed into these heirlooms, but of course, if you breed them, they're no longer heirlooms because you've upgraded them. So, but if you can get the heirloom flavor, matter of fact, I've got one tomato variety over here that was actually bred to taste like an heirloom. And yeah, I don't know. It's not as good. I'm actually not fond of it. I probably will never grow it again. It's called the Mountain Rogue. But you know, some people like it. Everybody's got their own taste in tomatoes, anything we grow. But more people favor the taste of heirloom than they will a regular tomato. But also I grow some good regular tomatoes, okay? How many acres or plants? Okay, right now we've got around 4,000 plants in this one field, which that accumulates to just about an acre. I have another field away from here that is my late tomatoes that we'll start picking probably in 2 weeks, and that is my fall field. It's just about 3,000, so it's a smaller field, which fall to year you don't sell the tomatoes quite as hardy as you do in the summertime, but they'll still sell. Yes, I would like to plant less if I didn't have to throw away. Most of my heirlooms, when it's all said and done, I'm probably throwing away approximately 30 to 35% of them, and that's on a good time. Now, if we have a lot of rain, we're looking at maybe throwing away 60% of them. And so you really got to have, that's what I was talking about, crack resistant, because without that, you don't, anytime the weather bothers you like the rain they're talking about now, that's why we're picking the day, is because we're picking the day early because of the rain that's supposed to be here. So, and any rain on a heirloom is not good. Matter of fact, most of the people that grow them for a living are actually putting them in high tunnels now, so they do not have to deal with that. I just don't like the taste of a tomato out of a high tunnel. I've had I grew them in a high tunnel 2 years, and if you can't get an heirloom that tastes like an heirloom out of the high tunnel, I don't want to deal with it. See, I like to eat too. So this year is the first year I've had Cherokee Purple, Marboni, Marbone, Margold. My general mainstay and heirloom tomatoes is Brandywine and Cherokee Purple. That's generally my two top producers, top sellers, and they're good, okay? But this year we're trying these new ones. I'm impressed with the striped German. I like the looks of it. It's a beautiful tomato. I have not eaten one yet, but I will, I'm sure, sooner or later. And the production right now is crazy out of this world. I don't know how everybody else is, but I know how I am right now. Okay, we got more tomatoes than I've probably ever had on heirlooms right now. So, and I've grew a lot of them. Well, the one that, like I said, the one we got that's supposed to be bred to be an heirloom or a flavor as an heirloom, it still has the crack problem. It still, and you know, and that's what I thought they would have took out of it. It has a stronger tomato flavor and a bit of a wing to it instead of the sweetness that a lot of your heirlooms have. And but like I said, it's good on a sandwich and stuff like that. It's just that they're also, it's hard to sell them because they're not an heirloom. Okay, you can't say they're an heirloom when they're not an heirloom, and they still look like an heirloom. Okay, so if it had a better flavor, better taste and stuff like that, I wouldn't worry about it. I would tell them this are a new improved heirloom tasting tomato, but I can't even say that, okay? That's a Mountain Road. The only one in this bunch that I'm not sure of, the new heirlooms that I haven't got a real good feeling for, I think it's the Marbone that has the brown tint to it instead of the reddish or the purple. I haven't really, I've ate some of them and yeah, I don't know. No, that is, well, let's see. Maybe it is the Marbone, but one of the Mars is a brownish looking tomato. And I had never even seen them before, so I didn't know what it was. Yeah, they've got, now that's good. I mean, that and the Margode is just like a striped German. They're just basically the same as a striped German. And I told him, I said, I got some yellow tomatoes over here. Oh, you ain't supposed to have. And we got to looking at them. They was yellow, but when we turned them over, they had the red on the bottom. So they're, yeah, like a striped German. The heirloom and the grafted ones are pretty well neck and neck as far as any disease that's bothering them. Like, it's hard to believe these things are in production 2 weeks, but I mean, well, just a little over a week, and they're can't see the tomatoes, which is a good thing when this time of year, where my field tomatoes down there that's 2 weeks ahead of these, they're starting to show the effects of production, and they're starting to turn brownish and what have you, where these ain't.
Ryan, can you guys see the next slide?
Yes, we're good.
Okay.
So we did, with the help of Dennis and his crew, took a tremendous amount of time, but did collect all of the yields from all of the different treatments. And so again, that was, you know, the heirlooms, the French improved varieties, which are hybrids, and then the grafted ones. And so this is the information that we got. And so he, you know, basically gets $1.50 per pound. And so we only weigh the fruit that he could sell. And so in some cases there might, you know, be yield that is not incorporated here because it was cracked or split and was going to end up in the row middles because it couldn't be sold. You know, but if we were to classify all of the reds, which would be the Brandywine and the equivalent Marbone, and then the grafted versions. And this does also incorporate the cost of the plants and the seeds. So the Marbone grafted plant, which we purchased, which cost almost $4.50, even in figuring that into this equation, he was still able to sell $19.63 worth of fruit. So this doesn't incorporate fertilizer treatments and things that all the plants would have got, but it does incorporate the cost of the seed or the plant. When you pin that against, say, Brandywine, he still has a cost in growing out that plant, but the seed is certainly less expensive. And so I figured that just to be $1 per plant is his cost, which he said might actually be a little bit cheaper than that. But, basically he was able to make over $3 more per plant when comparing the Marbone grafted with the next best, which was just the straight Brandywine. So that doesn't seem like a whole lot on a plant by plant basis, but if you were to extrapolate that out to an acre, Dennis could possibly realize, $14,000 more per acre than if he was just to plant his traditional Brandywine variety. Then you can kind of see where the other ones fell in, the Marbone behind that and the Brandywine grafted behind that. I've also just, in comparison, put a timeline over here on the right side. And so you can see kind of when things come off, because there's a potential that, because the grafted plants are so vigorous, they might potentially produce later, which might not be a good thing. It could get you into the heat more, could, miss the window of being able to sell tomatoes early in the season, which we do want to hit. Okay, next we'll go to our category, which we're calling the yellows, which would be your Brandywine. Your striped Germans and your Margold. And so you can see where everything matched up here. So interestingly enough, the grafted ones were not the best. In this case, it was actually the Margold that was the best. And then if you were to compare that just against the striped German, you're looking at, over $4 more that you're making per plant if you're comparing the improved variety against the standard heirloom variety. So if you were to just compare it against Margold and striped German grafted, you're still making significantly more money by choosing the improved French variety. And then you can see where they all come off basically at the same time. And so choosing one because of earliness probably isn't relevant in this situation. And then finally, we'll look at the best of the purple. So this is the Cherokee purple category. And overall, if you were to compare them, the yield is just not as great as they are with the reds or the yellows. But interestingly enough, the Cherokee purple was the most profitable in this situation, followed by the Marnero. Dennis did mention in the video that this was an ideal growing season for tomatoes in Arkansas. We're likely not to have consistent years like this where it doesn't rain and it's awfully dry, which is good for reducing cracks and diseases. So there might be an opportunity going forward where one of these improved varieties outperforms the heirlooms, but at least this year we saw where the Cherokee purple actually did a little bit better. I think more interesting in this case, you can see where the Marnero, which is the orange line in the graph, actually came off quite a bit earlier than the Cherokee purple, which is the dark blue. And so this might be a situation where you'd actually want to grow two. That way you can extend the season and you don't have quite the dramatic peak and then fall. And so I think, at least I hope, Dennis, and he can speak for himself here, we'll be able to take some information from what we did and, make some benefits and some changes to his operation going forward that, bottom line will hopefully make him more money and get him more customers and, keep the customers that he already has. And we will leave some opportunity at the end for question and answers.
Dennis, would you like to say a word on, the results? Would you grow any of these varieties again or use the grafted based on what happened this summer?
Well, from what I see, I'm not overly impressed with the grafted part of it because, that added expense. And also that takes the beginning of the planting season out of my hands. You're relying on them to get them to you on time and everything. And I grow all of my own plants. This is first year I have had anything in the field that I didn't grow myself, but that's to be expected because I don't think I could handle it, I guess, if you had all the setup and stuff. But what I did find out here is I do like the Marnero, the one that looks like Cherokee purple, because like Ryan was saying, it peaks earlier. And also I think it's a little less cracks than the Cherokee purple. The Cherokee purple are real super bad to crack. And also I like the Margold. That Margold is a fine looking tomato, especially on the market. People just go crazy over it. And then when you cut it, it looks like it's got blood in it. And it's pretty good flavor. I finally ate a couple of them. It may not be as acidy as some of the others, but I'm pretty sure I'll do the Marnero and the Margold again, but probably not grafted. I'll probably have some of them because it's nice to have a mixture in the heirlooms because it, like I say, everybody, you wouldn't believe all the tomato experts in this world at the farmer's market. I mean, I feel in comparison, I know. But anyway, keep them happy, long keep them coming back. But I do appreciate getting the chance to actually learn about some new varieties. It took me 5 years, people wanting me to grow Cherokee Purple before I ever done that. And finally I did. And I've been hooked on it for 10 now. So sometimes I'm just a hard head.
Well, thanks, Dennis. It's been great working with you on this project.
Well, I enjoyed it.
Ryan, do you want to talk about the next site?
Sure. So the next one was at Ozark Alternatives, and we are also very lucky to have Paul Czaprecki, who is an extremely busy person, to join us on this conference. And so he'll be able to speak more to it. But as an introduction, traditionally Paul has been a great farmer for me to work with just because he does so many different things. He's also certified naturally grown. And so, if those of you are not familiar with it, it's, more or less being organic certified. And so all natural. If he does do any inputs, that's natural fertilizers, natural pesticides in some cases, and he can speak a little bit more to that, and I think it's in the video as well. And he traditionally sells a lot to Ozark Natural Foods and to a few other wholesale markets, but has set up roadside stands in the past, but a lot of farmers market sales as well. And so he certainly is going for quality and taste just as much as Dennis is. So the purpose of this demonstration was just to kind of compare these grafted varieties compared to what he traditionally grew, which was some red slicing tomatoes in his hoop house and then some heirlooms outside. So we just wanted to see if potentially these grafted varieties could improve his overall productivity and profitability in a certified naturally grown setting or using organically grown practices. One of the varieties that he likes, and so we were able to find the grafted version of it. Again, we just bought these, was called BHN 589. It's not the prettiest sounding name as far as marketability goes, but it is designed to be a hoop house type tomato. And so that's what Paul was doing in this situation. So it's a typical red-brown slicing. It's said to be very disease resistant, very productive, and also a pretty good tasting variety at the same time. And here is the video, and then we'll introduce you to the information that we got afterward.
Hey, welcome to Ozark Alternatives Farm here in Lowell, Arkansas. My name is Paul Czaprecki. I'm the head farmer here. This is my 10th year growing certified naturally grown food, flowers, and fruit here at our farm. I've been very interested in growing organic food since I learned a lot about how conventional food has been grown, and there's been a growing demand for growing organically in our area. So that's something that I found a real good opportunity to expand into. Here at the farm, Ozark Alternatives, we only grow certified seeds, USDA seeds, and we use no pesticides, no herbicides, or synthetic fertilizers. So this year we're working on a trial test with grafted and ungrafted tomatoes to find out if we can improve our yields by using a grafted tomato that has high resistance to disease and pest and hopefully produces more fruit. I've never used grafted tomatoes of any kind ever, so this is a new experiment for us and our farm. It's something that I've heard about, but until you do it yourself one-on-one, it's hard to take somebody else's results and apply them to your farm. So the best way is to, invest into some of these grafted tomatoes, put them in the field, do side-by-side trials, keep the data, and mostly what we're trying to do is focus on yield, but also looking at disease and pest resistance. So we're just now starting to harvest some of our ripe tomatoes. We are doing 2 different varieties this year. We're doing a heirloom Brandywine and then a high tunnel version variety called BHN. That's specifically for high tunnels that can take higher heat. They're a determinate tomato, so they have a short window and they produce a lot of fruit all at once, and then you're done. Whereas the Brandywines are an indeterminate, so they'll keep growing, and as long as they're being watered and fed, they're going to produce. So we're doing this side-by-side test to determine if it's better to just go ahead and buy the seeds yourself and start them, or to invest into the grafted. There was about a 2-week delay in the time of us getting the grafted plants and our plants that were by seed. So what you'll see, at this part of the stage of the trials is, the grafted are a little bit behind, but only by about 2 weeks. But so far so good. They're growing. The grafted ones caught up quite quickly. They've got a lot of fruit on them. They're ripening right now. And we're going to do some harvesting today and start to calculate some of the numbers and keep it going. Yeah, so growing organically does present some challenges and some issues as a farmer. And that's something that just kind of goes with the territory since we're not using the pesticides and the herbicides. So some of the challenges that we've had is we are experiencing some fruit worms, and they get in there and do damage. So we try to spot them right away. We try to pick off as many as we can, and then we use OMRI approved organic certified pesticides that help us out. So we're experiencing some worm damage. We have some early blight, which is very common in all tomatoes across the board. In 10 years of growing, I've never not had early blight, so that's something that we deal with. But one of the struggles that we're dealing with this year is being this part of the season, which is almost end of July. It's the hottest time of the year, so our temperatures are raising up into 120 degrees in the high tunnel. So we're noticing some tomatoes that aren't quite ripening up. And that does happen at this time of the season. So the plant has a hard time taking up nutrients at that time. So we're trying to add a little extra nutrients. We're adding some fans, trying to reduce the heat at the hottest part of the day. So we do have some struggles, but I like to say, when you're farming, all naturally, you got to grow 1% for the bugs and the disease, 1% for you, and another percent for your customers. So you always just got to grow more than what you expect, because you're always going to have these losses through the season. But we think there's a tremendous value and benefit to growing organically, and our community is really looking for these kinds of foods. So it is. There are challenges, but there are also a lot of rewards in it. So. Yeah, by being certified naturally grown, markets are opening up, and we see more and more folks at the farmers market that are interested in buying organic food. You have families come along with little children, and the first question they ask is, do you spray? And of course, we're happy to say, no, we don't, and we're certified, and we have our kids working at the market, and that's all they want to hear. So at the market, you don't seem to be able to raise your prices to offset that organic standard. What I've noticed in the past is a lot of other farmers see you raise your price because you are organic, and they'll just go ahead and raise their price as well, even though they may not be. But the opportunity at Ozark Natural Foods, which is a local cooperative grocery store, they give us a premium on our product, and you can only sell there if you are certified naturally grown or USDA organic certified. So a lot of times their wholesale prices are equal to what I can sell retail at the farmer's market. So, and not only that, they buy volumes at a time, and they just have a huge following there. So the community really supports local farmers and local foods. So a tomato that's going to produce really well, really early, and be disease and pest resistant is really important. So this grafted test is really great for us to see if this is going to provide that for us, and do a cost analysis on the amount that it costs to buy the grafted tomatoes versus the seeds. So we'll see. Stick around. So these are the Brandywine. They're an heirloom tomato, which means they've been around for at least probably 100 years. People have been saving and collecting the seeds. It's a variety that has a real tendency to crack pretty easily. And so that's one thing that I've noticed. I've started to pull away from some of the heirlooms, even though a lot of people like them, is, I end up, having maybe 30% waste, especially if you get a big rain that comes in and if you haven't harvested them right away. They'll crack really easily, but great flavor, excellent taste. And so what you might notice is, a lot of these tomatoes, I'll just take one off right here, will start to crack pretty heavily, and it's just barely starting to ripen up. So what I found over the years is a lot of times I'll pick my tomatoes at this stage and just let them ripen off the vine to avoid losing this tomato, because given another week, or if we get the rain coming in a couple more nights, this will explode and all this will go to waste. So one great way to avoid that loss is to pick the tomatoes just a little bit earlier. So what you're seeing here today is, this is the plants that I started by seed, and these are the grafted plants that came in. Now, my tomatoes were started about 2 weeks prior to these showing up. So there is a little bit of noticeably larger growth here on the seeded tomatoes versus the ones that were grafted. But what we'll see is these will start to catch up, and I believe we'll have like about a 2 week extra harvest date on these ones, as these ones are just now starting to ripen up. So the true data will come towards the end of the season once we've harvested and calculated all the weights off the seeded ones, and then we'll continue to collect the data off the grafted ones. So here again, here's one thing right here. We got the fruit worm. I just looked down and here they are. They're on there. So we have used at least 2 different BT and spinosad sprays over the last 4 weeks to try to help reduce those. But even these little guys, they come back and they get on your plant. So this is something that we deal with on a yearly basis. But as long as we stay up on the controls and try to harvest before they get to the fruit, we still retain a lot of it. So but as you can see, these things are just really getting started. We're just starting to pull the first couple of ripe tomatoes. So we'll be growing more and more, and we'll keep up with the data. Okay, so we're in the high tunnel now. This is where we have our BHN varieties. Again, we have a 2 week delay on our grafted versus our seeded tomatoes. So these are the plants that I started about 2 weeks prior to getting the grafted plants. So you can kind of see that the grafted plants have really caught up, and it's hard to tell the difference in the size. But one difference that we are noticing with the 2 weeks is that we're actually just now starting to get really nice ripe tomatoes coming off the vine. Whereas these ones are just barely starting. So far, we've seen about the same amount of damage from the fruit worms on both of the varieties. So, grafted versus seed, I'm not really seeing any difference there. They both are really good on disease resistance. So far, I've seen almost no disease, no early blight on either one of these so far. So it's hard to tell at this point, but we'll continue to monitor that. So right now we're really excited about basically our first harvest. It's the end of July, and this variety is a specific high tunnel variety. It's also a determinate variety, which means that it's only going to grow to a certain height and then stop growing and stop producing fruit. Whereas the Brandywines outside are an indeterminate. They will continue to grow and the vines will expand and throw off fruit until it freezes. So I really have started to lean more towards the determinate plants in my growing, because you get a good, robust harvest, and then it's time to pull them out, and you know exactly when to take them out. Whereas with the indeterminates, there's always this sense that you might get more as the plant grows. But what I found is that last couple of weeks, you just don't get the volume that's worth to keep them in and keep caring for them. So I typically have moved more towards a determinate tomato, which these are, which again, only get to a certain height and stop growing and stop throwing out blooms. So you get a lot of robust growth in a short amount of time, very good high quality fruit. And that allows me to now pull these tomatoes in another 4 to 5 weeks and move on into a fall crop and take advantage of the high tunnel. Whereas in years past, I've had indeterminates growing here, and literally I've let them go into November and December, which was great. It was nothing better than having tomatoes for Christmas, but that forego a whole crop over the winter that I could have grown greens and kales and collards and carrots. The value just wasn't there. So I've learned to try to grow these determinants and then pull them out at the time that we can move on to a winter crop in enough time to get them in and get it up before it gets cold. So once again, we'll take a little look around in here, and we're going to start to harvest and get to see some of these tomatoes. And we're excited about keeping the data and finding out if it's really worth it to do the grafted tomatoes versus just the seeds. So stick around.
All right, thanks again to Paul. And this is, one of the reasons that we would do a demonstration in the first place, and we're lucky enough to have money that was granted to us to implement this. But rather than Paul having to pay for grafted tomatoes that are said to be, much improved to a non-grafted version, in this case, we did not actually realize that. And so, one of the caveats there was, he had started some plants, and the time that we were able to get the grafted ones didn't line up just perfectly. So the grafted plants went in just a little bit later than the non-grafted plants, but within 2 weeks anyway. You wouldn't have expected to see a big difference because of that. But for whatever reason, in both situations, the non-grafted version of the plants produced more than the grafted version. So I did not extrapolate the information much further than just total marketable yield, just because it's kind of a moot point if the cheaper version outperforms the more expensive version. And so I don't know if Paul wants to speak more to this, but that was a fairly straightforward result, I guess, what we got from this demonstration. Paul, you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think, you summed it up pretty well, and the numbers really speak for themselves. There was more production in the ones that I started by seeds versus the ones that were grafted. The loss from the disease and pest was almost across the board equal. I really didn't see anything that would kind of offset the production value. So being that there was that 2-week delay, really, honestly, the plants seemed to catch up in that time, and the harvests did continue a little bit longer than the ones that I started by seed. But in the long run, for me and my experience indoor and outdoor, both different varieties, I would, definitely just stick with the seeds. And it was really great side-by-side analysis to look at these and just see for ourselves that this is something that we would have liked to do, but without the help of the university and extension, that we probably couldn't have. So we really appreciate that and thank them for incorporating our farm into this study. So, yep.
Yeah, I really appreciate working with Paul. He's an excellent farmer, and I learn a ton every time I go out there. Just appreciate everybody for their time and effort on this, because it's not easy to collect all that information. So appreciate it, Paul.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving on to Washington County, we have Colin Massey, who is working with Larry Galligan, and Colin will tell you about that project.
Thanks, Heather, and also thanks, Larry, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us and allowing us to conduct this trial on your farm. So this is Riverside Specialty Farm. Larry Galligan's the producer, and this is in West Fork. It's been farming there since 2017, and Larry's also certified naturally grown. And he farms on about 8 acres, mostly vegetables, berries, herbs, and also some specialty crops, including hops. And he farms in both several fields and a high tunnel, a greenhouse for some starts. And he's also been experimenting with some cover crops, and mostly selling at farmers markets, some direct sale, even to some restaurants. Next slide. And so really the justification for this demonstration was similar, really similar to what we did at Paul's place, which is really to evaluate the effectiveness of that grafted versus a traditionally grown high tunnel tomato for season extension and also for disease management. And really what I mean by season extension, not necessarily within a season, but actually an additional season in the high tunnel. So Larry had planted pretty much a red slicer tomato called Frederick in the high tunnel, but especially in 2019, he started to notice symptoms of late blight and some bacterial wilt, and was actually planning on rotating out of the high tunnel. And so we felt like this was an opportune place to see if a grafted tomato would actually provide some resistance and allow one more growing season in the high tunnel. And so just a description from Johnny's, the variety we used in this trial was called Geronimo. And it's supposed to be very firm, 8 to 10 ounce high yielding fruit. These are pretty tall plants. If I'm not mistaken, these are still growing and almost have reached the top of the high tunnel on their trellises. And its rootstock is Xinjiang Gang. It's supposed to offer improved germination uniformity and vigor and have that bacterial wilt resistance package. These are indeterminate certified organic seeds and grafts. And just a comment at the picture on the right. In this trial, we did lose a few plants, not too many, but mainly to mechanical injury at that graft union. So it's something to consider if you're dealing with grafts.
I've been reading and watching some videos about grafted tomatoes and how they're supposed, I guess some producers use that rather than rotating out of tunnels. They use grafted tomatoes because they're supposed to be more disease resistant. We were going to rotate this tunnel out of tomatoes this year because we had seen some disease, some fungal diseases in the soil at the root collar. And we were approached with the idea of doing this demonstration. And I was really curious to see if it, if there was a noticeable difference in plant vigor and disease resistance, because we're still going to rotate this tunnel out. But if there's a way to sneak an extra season in, because a lot of people, high tunnels are expensive real estate, and most of us don't have a lot of them to keep rotating through. And so anything you can do to grab an extra season or two would be beneficial. Yeah, so far we've lost no plants solely to disease. We've lost some to mechanical damage, and we have some plants that are definitely more vigorous than others. But so far nothing. At this point, we would start to see plant mortality from fungal disease in the past, and it's the end of July, and we've had none so far. We see southern blight. So you'll just see the plant kind of collapse all at once and see all the sclerotia around the base of the plant, the root collar. And that's been our biggest problem the last 2 years here. It's the variety is Geronimo, and it's not one I've grown before. I'm not familiar with it, but it has characteristics that were supposed to be more in line with what we've been growing the previous 2 years, which was a variety called Frederick, which was a greenhouse tomato we get from Johnny's. It's a medium-sized red slicer. They're pretty. People like them. You can leave them clustered or not. And so far, the plants have performed similarly to what we've seen in the past. It's a nice, tidy plant. Doesn't have a lot of. They started out extremely vegetative, great big leaves, but then after they hit a certain point, they kind of leaned out a little bit. So they're real easy to maintain, not a lot of pruning. But the fruit set came a little late. That's probably due to them being planted later. These weren't planted till May 14th. Um, and so far we've seen some differences within the high tunnel because the west side tends to stay a little hotter. The plants over there, we've had some blossoms dropping off, but on the east side, they have lost less flowers and seem a little more vigorous. Yes, these are indeterminates, and so we're going to leave them in the ground until October or until something kills them, you know, but we'll let them go till October. I started it 5 weeks, I think 5 to 6 weeks. I don't remember off the top of my head. I wanted to give it 6 weeks because we were starting them in a little propagation greenhouse and it was a little chilly. So I knew they wouldn't grow very fast. And the plants that, when we got the grafted plants from Johnny's, they were surprisingly small. They said they were coming in a 72 cell flat. And so but they were little plants. And so the plants we started here were a little ahead of them, but not much. But they all caught up with each other pretty quickly. So, but they were surprisingly small. Now, as far as fruit set, the one thing we haven't brought up yet was observationally, it seems like the grafted plants are setting higher numbers of smaller fruit on the clusters, and the ungrafted plants seem to be setting less fruit per cluster, but a larger fruit. We're starting to take some weights on some plants, and so we'll hopefully next set of measurements we can throw them, you know, in a spreadsheet and kind of see if that is the case. But yeah, it seems like we're getting more fruit per cluster on the grafted plants. But I haven't really seen clear evidence of disease. Most of what we've seen is we had some spider mite issues early on and some aphids, and the aphids we remedied pretty quickly. Spider mites kind of hung in there. We still got a few, but overall the plants seem about the same. They're starting to ripen up a little more evenly now, but we had to kind of we pulled 2 from one cluster, 2 from the other. Nothing, haven't really observed anything noticeably different yet, other than that fruit set and size. Yeah, so we put Surround wettable powder on these plants and we applied it about 10 days ago. It was pretty warm out here and we don't always get good cross ventilation in this little valley. So to help keep the plants cool and to deal with that mite issue that we were seeing, we applied a application of Surround. And so we mix it up in a blower mister and just come in here and apply it to the plants. And we noticed insect activity drop, and it really helps kind of cool the plants down because we noticed we saw less blossoms falling off after the application, even though the temperatures outside were staying about the same. It gets really bright in here. So like for the first couple days, it's like it almost hurts to be in here because there's a dusting of Surround on everything, and then it mellows out after a couple days. But and what's interesting too is it makes it really obvious the new growth. You can see almost daily how much they're growing because the new green vegetation is really obvious. And but no, we've used it on tomatoes in the past, and it really seemed to help with some of those little soft-bodied insects like the aphids and the mites, and it has a noticeable effect, I think, on keeping plants cooler. I'm going to try not to apply it again if I don't have to, because you have to clean it from the fruit, and that's an extra step. This is our 4th year of growing tomatoes in here. We were originally going to take them out this year because we'd grown tomatoes on this side, and then we had grown them on this side. And then last year we tried grow bagging tomatoes in here, and it really didn't work very well for us. And we had never done it before, so you know, I don't think we really knew what we were doing. But because we thought the grow bag would be an easy way to sort of, you know, not have to worry so much about that rotation, you know, because if you're bringing your media in and taking it out, then you're not so worried about disease buildup in the soil. Timing is everything. And if you're going to get grafted plants, making sure you can get plants early enough to make it worthwhile. These plants came from Johnny's. They were not available till May 10th. We got them in the ground on May 14th. That's 4 weeks ahead of, or 4 weeks behind, ideally, where you could have gotten plants tucked in here. It gets a little cold still in April. Like we had our last frost April 20th or 19th this year, but you know, earliness is the key to making the tunnels work. And I think either finding a way to have a supplier that can get you, if you could get your own grafts ready by mid-April, you'd probably be in business. And expect a certain amount of loss because they were a little touchier in handling. They would break at the graft sometimes. Even just like the wind would blow something in, it would touch them and knock them over. You know, so they were a little touchy for about the first 3 weeks. We lost a couple just trying to, you know, get them tied onto clipped onto strings the first time. No, they came with the little graft clips, the little silicone clips, and they had a little straw in the ground that helped support it, but that's it. I mean, they put them in a box and ship them here, and they stayed. I think we had one that had died in transit, but that was it out of 150 plants. Yeah, they were packed really securely. There was a lot of support. Yeah, I think the one that died might have died just because it dried out, so it wasn't even broken. But that was it. Yeah, they showed up in good shape. But earliness is the key, and the way to get them. If you can't get a supplier that can get them to you early enough, you might have to start your own. And so if we were going to keep doing this, we'd have to learn how to graft and to make it worthwhile and get that extra early season, you know, and just keep an eye on your pests, you know, and pest management's the thing. We always have a lot of aphid problems in here, you know, because this is just like an aphid factory in the winter. If you leave everything under frost blankets for a long time, it makes a nice cozy environment for aphids, especially in densely planted greens. And so the year before last, we had left a lot of stuff covered up for an extended period of time. And once those aphids get started, they're hard to get rid of. So just kind of keeping an eye on things like that. Because then once you get your tomatoes in here, you're instantly gonna have aphids transferred to tomatoes. And just cleanliness, hygiene is real important. When we prune, we come through and pick up. I came out here last night and pruned. I haven't cleaned anything up yet, but I'll come out here today and we'll carry all the vegetation out and the prunings and just trying to keep enough space and airflow between everything. It was easy. It's not a huge time commitment. I mean, I'm doing something I'd be doing in here otherwise. Like I said, I was going to grow something else in here this summer, but I'm still out here growing and managing stuff. Working with Extension has been great. You know, you guys are a great resource and you've been helpful. And tomatoes, you know, it's hard to say no to tomatoes because they're a profitable crop. People buy them, you can always sell them.
So thanks again to Larry for that. And as he mentioned, we did have some variability in that high tunnel. Again, this was Geronimo. Just looking at some initial data, as I mentioned, these plants are still growing. Larry is still harvesting and probably still collecting some data. But what we noticed first off was that the grafted actually had more pounds per plant. Our average fruit weight was similar, but it was smaller than what was advertised from Johnny's. We were looking at about 4 to 6 ounces versus the 8 to 10. But in talking with Larry yesterday, some of these later setting fruits they appear to be looking a little bit larger. So we may take a look at that data and see if those are increasing. And as he mentioned, something that was very visually obvious was there was a difference in the fruit per cluster. We actually saw about 3.12 fruit per cluster on the Geronimo grafted versus about just under 3 for the non-grafted. Next slide. And so just some really, I'm not an ag economist, just some really basic look at the value here and if this is worth it. Again, there's the initial cost with the grafted plant. We were looking at about $4.25 per plant versus about $1.60 for seed and transplant material. And if you just apply a basic per pound value of $2.50 to that minus that cost, you see a little bit better value in this trial with the Geronimo grafted around $11 versus about $9.65 for the non-grafted. So assuming we didn't have any plant loss in Larry's high tunnel, it's about 30 by 100. Those plants were spaced on 24-inch centers. That came out, the grafted came out with a higher value, about $405. And if you extrapolated that out to an acre, that would be close to, I believe, about $6,000 advantage with the grafted. Now, obviously, we would need to replicate this in some different conditions. But if tomatoes is your moneymaker in this case, as far as getting an extra season, there could be some value to it.
All right, we are at 1:30, but we do have a couple questions here. I understand if anybody needs to go, you can feel free to do that. I will quickly show the contact information for Ryan and Colin. They're at the county extension offices. You can also find our YouTube page by going to the Center for Arkansas Farms and Food, caf.uark.edu. And at the bottom of that page, you'll find links to our Facebook page and Instagram and YouTube. We're going to be posting this webinar to YouTube, but you can also find the farmer videos, because Zoom, doesn't do the quality of those videos any favors. So you can find those there. And also, if you're on Facebook, I would recommend that you we have a new Facebook group. It's called NWA Farming. So if there's a couple of questions here. Colin, I don't know if you can see these, but the first one is for Larry, it looks like.
I think all three of them are for Larry. And yeah, if I forgot to give Larry a chance to mention any final thoughts on that trial, and then we can get to those questions.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry about that, Larry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, they pretty much summed up my thoughts in the video. The plants, one thing that we need better temperature management in our tunnel. We're going to put fans in there. We were going to do it this year, but we couldn't get to it. Next year, that's a goal. The fruit does seem to be larger later in the season. We had a little bit of a gap because at the hot part of the year, we had lost several nodes worth of flowers. And so there was definitely a decline, probably, I'm just assuming, due to the high temperatures. And then we keep our plants under shade cloth, and we removed it at the end of the first week in September when temperatures started cooling off. And we were waiting to see when we were having that consistent fruit set. And so we took that shade cloth off. But while they're under shade, it helps also cool the tunnel down, but it might also increase the internode length on the plant. And so you're getting a little bit of a leggier plant than you might otherwise. And all of a sudden now they seem to be a little more compact on the last, couple feet of growth, but they're probably 12, 13 feet. And we don't lower and lean just because we've never really messed with that before. We just kind of let them go up, and they'll either go over the top wires in the tunnel, and we just let them hang. And it's kind of a drag. You got to pick them with a ladder at that point. But yeah, we're getting a pretty good fruit set right now, and the fruit size is averaging larger. I don't have the numbers on it yet, but we've got some. I weighed a few this morning, and we're looking at 6 to 8, 9 ounces on a lot of them now. So we're getting bigger fruit. And next year I think we're going to try to invest in fertigation too, so we can kind of spoon feed them a little extra nutrition as we go, because we're certified naturally grown. We went in and did a big pre-plant treatment based on our soil recommendations from Extension. And it's hard to side dress with organic fertilizers and really have it be effective, so I would like to figure out if we can, fertigate and help them out a little more, having some kind of even if it's fish emulsion, which I guess clogs drip lines a lot of the time, but we'll research it and see what we can do to kind of help feed a little more nutrition along the season as we go.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah.
I think you answered the first question, which was how the plants were suspended, and they were trellised on wire.
Well, they're trellised on string, and so you can buy tomato. What we do is we just buy the lightweight UV stable hay twine from the farm store, and use that because you get 10,000 feet in a roll, and it's pretty cheap. And you know it's UV resistant, so it's not gonna, because everything out there just gets beat to death by the sun, and so you just want to make sure you don't. We've had plants fall down before, and it's just a big mess. We did clip this year instead of wrapping, and the clips help a lot because if you get a breeze, they're definitely going to stay put. I see one of the other questions. What was the name of the powder you put on the tomatoes? It was a product called Surround. It's a wettable powder. It's just kale and clay. It's really finely ground. You make a slurry, and you can apply it with spray equipment. And you also we've dunked our transplants pre-plant as well. You just dump them in a bin, and it gives them a nice coating, and it will help discourage pests and certain diseases. I think it helps with powdery mildew, stuff like that. So
one last question was just kind of on the description of the Geronimo tomato. Was it more of a beefsteak tomato? Could you talk a little bit about what style of tomato it is?
I wouldn't call it a beefsteak. It's kind of a medium-sized tomato. You know, I guess a beefsteak, I always picture a big tomato like this guy here. And what we get are these kind of uniform, more round tomatoes. That's the Geronimo right there. So I don't consider that a beefsteak, but I'm not a tomato expert. I'm still learning. So, but anyway, hopefully that was helpful. So.
Thanks, Larry. Heather?
Phyllis asked one more question. She says, is it meating inside, but maybe does she, I think she might have a typo and says, is it meaty inside?
I guess I don't know. I don't think I wouldn't call it a beefsteak tomato. I picture like a big heirloom tomato, or like even like as far as hybrids go, like a big boy or a better boy as a beefsteak. And they're nice, and they're a little acidic. It's not real meaty. It's got a little bit of a pith in the middle, but it's not hard. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm not a tomato classification expert, so sorry.
All right, one last question, and then we're going to say goodbye. Any tips on soil health and growing tomatoes? Colin, do you want to talk about that? And
Sure. I may be having some mic problems. We'll see.
okay.
Yeah, really with regard, whether it's the farm or the home garden, and part of the reason we did this trial, especially on Larry's place, was with regard to soil-borne pathogens. And as he mentioned in the video, he was planning on rotating out of that. And I would say that's really the one main cultural control you can do with regard to soil disease is rotating your plants. If possible, we'd recommend not growing in the same place year after year, but kind of doing a 3-year rotation. And something else you may have noticed on several of the farms is some pruning of the lower leaves. Now these were under a high tunnel, so there wasn't a lot of splashing of the soil going on, but maybe out in a field or in a home garden, you get a big rain, you're going to get soil that splashes up on those lower leaves, and that can be a pathway for that disease. But really, crop rotation is really one of the most important in that regard.
Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time today. We appreciate you joining us. This webinar will be uploaded onto YouTube, and we will be having, we've got some other webinars planned for the rest of the year. So please follow us on the CAF Facebook page to stay up to date on those. Thank you all and have a good day.